my sermon is titled, "The Bigger the Problem, the Bigger the Hammer." So Christmas is over, we've had our celebrations, lovely meals, and we're on the doorstep of 2020. Lots have been said about 2020 being perfect vision, 10-10 vision, 20-20 vision is perfect vision, so there's an expectancy about 2020. There's always a sense of expectancy at the dawning of a new year, and rightly so. We are expectant and excited about what's going to happen, what's new, and maybe laying off the old. But in the midst of all of this, we might also experience a sense of loss, uncertainty, worry, and maybe even fear. Some of us have kids leaving home for the first time. I'm thinking of Wayne and Maureen. Their son has gone to Japan. For the first time, he's out of the house. Maybe you start the new year without a job. Maybe you start a new year with old debt or an old ailment or illness. You might even be in a space where you question your excitement. Is it a figment of my imagination? Is it just the season playing its part and enticing you to feel excited just because? Or is this excitement seated or nestled in something true? As humans, we can feel so at odds with ourselves and our own perspective. What will the future bring? Overwhelmed by what we see and feel and think, we can always lift our heads, look to creation, notice God, and get perspective. So for the problem of perspective, I want to suggest the big hammer of God's creation. You know, perspective, if you think I look bad from down there, imagine how bad you look from up here. It's just a joke, but there's different perspectives. I see the whole, you just see the backdrop. And when perspective change, we sometimes find, hey, maybe I didn't get this thing right. I was too locked into myself and locked into what's seen. So Isaiah even urges us to look up. So I'm going to throw a couple of stats at you just to open your mind to the vastness of creation. And having that perspective, put a spin on a perspective that could give you true hope for 2020. Not just something that's blown up by industry or maybe your own excitement, but something that's true, something that you can hold to. So the psalmist writes that the heavens declare the glory of God. If we look at the stars, we immediately think of Abram, and God showed him the stars, and I'll make your nations as plenty as the stars. Paul in Romans says that, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. I'm going to take a small peek at the enormity and the vastness of only the stars, the universe, and bring us to a bit of a perspective and trust God that that hammer for the big problem of perspective will blow our minds and give us new perspective. And if you can put those slides up, Anne. The average speed of a commercial aircraft is about roughly 800 kilometers per hour. The distance from the Earth to the Moon is 385,000 kilometers. If you were to jump on a plane flying at 800 kilometers an hour, it will take you 21 days to reach the Moon. That's without stopping over at wherever you're going to have to stop over to get to the Moon. You can't have a wee break or have boiled eggs next to the road. It's continually flying for 21 days. It gets better. The distance from the Earth to the Sun is 150 million kilometers. In that same aeroplane, it will take you 21 years to reach the sun. Can you remember what you did 21 years ago? It's a long time. You'll be flying and you'll feel it on the seat of your pants if you fly for 21 years. Now the distance, the sun is a star, but the distance to the nearest star beyond our sun is 4.3 light years. Now light traveling at 1,080 million kilometers an hour, that's faster than your average GTI. That distance, a light year is the distance traveled by light at that speed in a year. So, seeing that we don't work in those terms, let's bring it down to meters or kilometers so we can get a grip. And we're talking about the first star beyond our sun. Okay? So if we scale this whole thing down so we can get a grip on it, and we make the Earth as big as a peppercorn, then the sun will be the size of about 20 centimeters diameter ball, as depicted there on the picture. At this scale, the distance from the peppercorn to the ball would be 24 meters. And our scale aeroplane will fly for 21 years from the peppercorn to that ball. Okay, 24 meters. Now what would you think? Don't throw the next slide. What would you think the distance from that peppercorn would be to the nearest star? Is there anyone who can just think? If the distance to from the peppercorn to the sun, or the ball, is 24 meters, 35 kilometers. Okay? So put this in brace yourself. The distance on that scale from that peppercorn to the nearest star, 6,400 kilometers. It's 4.5 times Cape Town and back to the nearest star. If you were to fly, preferably with an airline that has got longevity in the aeroplanes, it will take you, next slide, 51 billion years. Now, next slide, Anne, if you consider that there are by the time these stats came out, there were 6 billion people on the planet. 6 billion. That is 6 with 9 zeros. For each person on this planet, there is 1 trillion stars. That's 1 with 12 zeros. Now you can wrap your head around how many stars there are. It's amazing. And it's vast. But it gets better. Isaiah tells us that God measured the earth with the palm of his hand. All this dumbfounding distances and volumes he measured with the palm of his hand. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you've set in place. He set them in place with his fingers. It's a figurative speech, but nevertheless, it puts an accent on how big this God is. We can't even travel to the nearest star. There's 1 trillion stars per each individual on this planet, and there's about 6 billion of us. It is immense. And the distances and the measurements, it defies our thinking. Yet God measures us with his hand. This leaves the impression of a mighty and a huge God, and that the universe was not created haphazardly. He got involved with his hands, with his fingers. He personally formed this vastness. What a majestic God. Are you feeling the hammer blow yet? Not? Let's hammer on. He not only created and measured the universe by His hand and His word, He even named each of the stars. He knows them by name. He not only counted them, but He named them. So He doesn't know the total volume, which would be a brave endeavor for you to do if you have time to count all the stars without being interrupted with a WhatsApp. He doesn't merely know the total, but He knows the number of each one. He's named them. He determined the number of the stars and calls them each by name, the psalmist says. Isaiah says, "Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each one by name. Because of His great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." This not only leaves the impression of a mighty and a huge God, and that the universe was not created haphazardly. He not only got involved with His hands and His fingers, He not only personally formed this vastness, but He is also vastly intimate. He knows each one by name. What a majestic God. He not only created and measured and named the universe, He upholds them and sustains them by the very word of His power. He is intimately involved in His creation. John 1, the famous first 4 verses of John 1, almost the genesis of the New Testament, says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He was with God in the beginning. Through Him all things were created or made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. The writer of Hebrews says that the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by the power of His word. So not only did God create it by His word, but by His word He sustains them. They keep shining. They stay their course. They don't attack Earth. The ratios are perfect. Our distance from the sun, we don't fry, depending on where you go, and we don't freeze to death. It's bearable on planet Earth. God upholds it by His word. Sun come up, sun go down, sun come up, sun go down. Lungs breathe, heart beat, eyes see. Oxygen moves through the veins. God upholds us with His word. He wasn't a clockmaker that made something and left it to its own devices. In Colossians, Paul writes, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in Him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him, the Word, all things hold together." Now certainly you can feel the hammer blow coming. The problem of perspective. The big problem of perspective needs a big hammer. And the big hammer of God's creation is the solution to our perspective problem. John 1 verse 14. An amazing thing happened. This God, who measures the universe with the stretch of His hand, who upholds all of this by His word, He sent His Son. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This powerful God, this majestic God, who measures the universe with His hands and created all of it by His word and upholds it by His Word. This God sent His Son, the Word, through whom He created all this vastness. He became flesh. He lived as a human. He lived a life worthy of God. He lived a righteous life. And then He paid the penalty for sin, dying a gruesome death on the cross, Calvary, reaching down into the microcosm of our hearts with such vast accuracy that the writer of Hebrews says the Word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Maybe you have a perspective on 2020 and the future that is pushing you down. It's making you look up, down. Do you feel lost in the vastness of all the world has to offer in 2020? Maybe you've considered the vastness of your perspective, and it's left you without hope. Another example or another portrayal of God's glory we can see in our cosmos being heliocentric. The Earth revolves around the sun. It's not geocentric. The sun does not revolve around the Earth. If you look at Earth, terra firma, we all go there at some stage. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But Helios, the sun is like untangible. It's a ball of flames. It's almost likened to God. And Earth is where we come from. So we revolve around God. God does not revolve around us. So maybe we need our perspective changed. Maybe you've become geocentric in your perspective. And it's left you without hope, because there is no hope in yourself. You can forget about it. There's no one who can help you but God. If you have a perspective that has ripped the hope out of you, that has left you with a sense of guilt, shame, maybe no expectation for 2020. You look at your decaying body or your swollen stomach and you just don't get as excited about 2020 as everybody around you. I want to urge you. It's easy. There's not much to be seen in Joburg because of the ambient light. But as Isaiah urges us, lift up your eyes. Look to the stars. Think about the vastness of it. And think about the fact that God knows each of those stars. And He maintains them by the power of His Word. And on top of that, that Word became a man, paid the penalty for your sin. Can you feel the hammer blow? Can you feel the perspective seeping in through your veins? And you realize, but there's hope. Because a living God made a living commitment to never leave me, to never forsake me. He knows my weaknesses. He walked this earth. There's nothing you can throw at God that will make Him go, I need to speak to Koz, I need counseling. You're not going to catch God off guard. The name God denotes that everything is covered when it comes to God. So I want to encourage you, be dumbfounded by the vastness of His creation, the vastness of His intimacy, and the power of His Word to be your perspective for 2020. Don't let the world suggest to you that you should have this, or you should have done that, or you should know this, or you should wear this, or you should drive this, or I should have been there by now, or whatever we can heap upon ourselves when we have a perspective of looking down. The Bible says God is the lifter of our head. When you get engulfed in what you can see with your eyes, because you're walking with your head not lifted, let Jesus be the lifter of your head. Let Him lift your head. Look at the vastness of what He's done. See His face and be invigorated with truth and hope. Something you can carry around that is true, that will never fade. The psalmist reminds us that God formed each of us in our mother's womb. He knows our frame, that we are dust. So when you come to Him and you say, Lord, I've made this about me. I'm at a loss for everything that is good because I became me-centered. God knows your frame. All you can say is, forgive me. Lift my head. Let me see your glory. Let your face shine upon me. And let hope, and real peace strike the chords of my heart so that I can enter 2020 with clear vision, seeing Jesus and not myself. He is the biggest hammer for the biggest problem, sin, which wrestles us into the wrong perspective, making us believe what we see and see what we believe, and causes us to have false hope, worry, anxiety, and fear. Philippians 4, verse 6 to 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I prepared those verses, and during the prayer time upstairs, Gordon brought Philippians 4 verse 8, and it's just so apt. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. My wife and I have our own challenges coming into 2020, and it sparked off this ache in my heart. Lord, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And the moment the word hit me, look up. Let God guide you. Let God fill you with true hope. Get lost in the vastness of who He is, and forget about yourself. Forget about the little things that you make so big. In the light of this magnificent God, I would like to extend an invitation to any of you who got bullied by the world and the enemy into a wrong perspective. To think that there is not a big enough hammer for your problem. We can maybe afterwards come forward. I'm not going to ask you to do it now. But if there's any one of you that felt the Spirit tug at your heart, I've lost perspective. I need to get my head in the heavens again. And not get the heavens into my head, because it will crack open. You can't understand Him. You can't even fly to the nearest. You can't even fly to the moon. Who will pay for the petrol? So let God be God, and let God transform your perspective.